Hi, and welcome to the Hypnotex podcast. I'm Rob from Hypnotex, and I was going to dig into the mailbag this week, but a subject came up, and I think we should dig into that instead. We'll go into the mailbag maybe next time around, but I read an article that popped up, and it was talking about a woman who got scammed. And this was a phone scam. Her phone rang and she answered it, and the person on the other end of the phone managed to get her to transfer, I think it was $3,000 over to them by claiming to be Amazon. First said, well, your Amazon order has been delayed. There's a problem with payment. It's for $300. And then she claimed, oh, well, I don't have any orders for $300. And they said, oh, well, and gave her some story. In any case, she then went to transfer $300 across to them, but somehow ended up transferring $3,000 to them. They said, of course, that's no problem. We're happy to refund the extra, and then disappeared with her money. Immediately, she started talking to people and telling them that she was hypnotized. You probably know, if you've read my blog or listened to me here, that I'm going to take sort of an immediate dim view of that. So I thought we'd go into a little more depth. And to make it even worse, in the article that I read, they had two hypnotists, one of whom's name I actually recognized and who really ought to know better, attest that she had been hypnotized. And this is just, it was such awful clickbait that I wanted to dig into it today and go into kind of compare and contrast some different types of hypnosis and talk about what they are versus what they are not. So how about the type of hypnosis that most people are familiar with? How about stage hypnosis? So this is that thing where you may have seen it for a high school graduation party where they put you... They put a group of people in the gymnasium. This is supposed to keep the kids from going out and drinking, so they put them in for a party. At the culmination of that party, they bring out this hypnotist who puts a line of chairs up front, and then people go up front, and then their hilarity ensues. They are basically, it looks like they're under the will of the hypnotist, and they do a bunch of silly stuff, oftentimes very demeaning, and then later afterwards go, oh my God, did you see Joan? I didn't think she would do, and it's sort of a formulaic kind of thing. And I'll say that there are some variations on this that work well. Mark Savard, a hypnotist in Las Vegas, he actually is at Planet Hollywood, has quite a good gig. It's not demeaning to the people. It's funny. He's very quick-witted and quick on his feet. And it's actually a very fun show. And it's stage hypnosis. It's a little silly. And Mark periodically does demonstrate during his show the power of hypnosis. In particular, if you're interested, there's a YouTube video of Mark stopping his show to... he had a participant on stage who had a stutter, a lifelong stutter, and it was pretty amazing how rapidly the guy went from stuttering, having a hard time even speaking to Mark, to speaking incredibly clearly at that point. And Mark talks a little bit about the power of hypnosis there. So there's an educational element there, but I've never seen Mark do anything that afterwards people were going to be ashamed of, where they were going to wish that they'd never done that, or that it's funny, and it walks up to that line where people, maybe if you're a little serious, you'd have a hard time laughing at yourself, but it's never demeaning. You never have anybody at his show. So that's a stage show that I like. And then there's another guy named Anthony Galley, and Anthony takes a completely different approach to stage hypnosis. What he does is combines it with motivational speaking. So you can imagine that you bring in Anthony, and he stands up on stage in front of your sales department, and then he uses hypnosis to demonstrate what would happen if all the salespeople in your organization had complete focus and complete concentration. And there's some funny moments, and he does some things where he'll challenge somebody that if they can remember what number comes after 3 when you're counting, that he'll give them $20. And it's fun to watch somebody go 1, 2, 3, 5 over and over and over again and swear that they're now now due the $20 because they got the number correct. So he does demonstrate a lot of the power of mind, and then he relates it back to skills. And so it's interesting because we're going to talk a little bit about that, but hypnosis is closely related to sales. And in fact, if you've ever stepped onto a used car lot and you've had a salesman come up to you, and you know how they start out that real simple with a handshake, and then they start to work from there, and they do things like build a yes ladder. They'll get you to agree to something and say yes. And so it's very closely related. And what Anthony teaches is how closely related hypnosis is to those sales techniques, to that motivation process. It's actually, and again, not demeaning to the people. It's power of the mind, power of hypnosis, power of focus. Fascinating presentations, Anthony Galley. I'll link to his stuff as well as Mark Savard's, and to that where Mark does the stuttering on stage. So stage hypnosis, there's shows all over everywhere. You may have seen one, you may have participated in them. Bar shows, they vary in size from a very small venue where the hypnotist is there and there's a half dozen people, up to full blown. You might have seen one at the state fair where somebody is up on stage and they bring up participants, and then again hilarity ensues. I like that phrase for stage hypnosis because it's designed to be funny. Comedy, stage hypnosis, kind of the way that it goes. It's real hypnosis. I don't know any stage hypnotists who use shills or plants or have people fake it, but they do choose out of their audience. They commonly do routines leading up to the show where they're testing the people in the audience. And what they're looking for is, in Kapacinian terms, they're looking for the somnambulists. They're looking for people who go into hypnosis easily and who go very deeply. Those are the most interesting subjects on stage. It's sort of like auditioning for The Price is Right, where you wear the loud costume, the bright Hawaiian shirt in the audience, and they come down and they're looking for people who are cheering loudly and who are in the mood to participate. And that's sort of how a stage show works. They walk through the audience, or they look out, and they have people do susceptibility tests, or they have people do various different demonstrations, and then they watch and they'll say, well, at this point, if your hand is still stuck to your forehead, come on up on stage, because those are the people who are going to be most susceptible to it. Obviously, in the sort of therapy side of things, we don't have the luxury of only working on the most susceptible people, but that's who you want for a stage show. They're fun. Check it out. Like I say, they vary between demeaning and really stupid and very base humor. If you get somebody who's sharp and smart, the show can be very educational and can actually be very fun to watch and very fun to participate in. A lot of times those people come off the stage and they're laughing as hard as anybody is, and it's very common at the end of the show to give a hypnotic gift, is what it's called, which is where you mention to the people that they're going to sleep better from then on out, or they're going to have better concentration, or they're going to have a positive memory where they remember how much imagination they actually have and how they're able to put it to use for themselves. But post-hypnotic suggestions that are actually valuable. So that's stage hypnosis. So a variation of that started coming about, it's been around forever, but it really kind of hit its stride in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and that's street hypnosis. And you can actually, you oftentimes will see buskers. Now, I'm here in the Seattle area, and so when you go downtown, at least before COVID and before the city started having riots every night, you could go downtown, and there were often musicians out on the corners, and you could stand and listen. Some of them were remarkable, some not so much, but some of them were really great. Well, those performers started to expand, and one of the things that started to come about was street hypnosis. And so you'll see this in the crowds at the fair sometimes. Sometimes you'll see it on street corners, and people doing basically a stage show in a up-close environment. It's sort of, sometimes you'll see a magician, somebody set up with a small tray, and he's doing up-close magic, things where cards disappear and poker chips fall out of people's noses and things. And this is a variation on that. This is a stage show that's done up close and personal. Very often, they'll only have one or two people who are their panel, their group of people who are actually working, unlike a stage show where there might be as many as 30 or more on the stage. So it's up close and personal. It's often very short. It demonstrates very quick power, ideally, power of hypnosis. Ideally, it's also not demeaning, and it's fun, so that whoever participates in it walks away saying, wow, that was really cool. Did you see when and there's any number of cool tricks. I don't want to give them away, but kind of fun. And if you get a chance, if you're walking along and you don't normally pay attention to street vendors, and I know a lot of people walk right by, if you have an interest in hypnosis, keep your eyes open. You'll see somebody out on the corner, and you'll see people standing around or standing with their arms up in the air like they're a tree. Walk over, because what's going on might be very interesting and very educational. It's actually, there are some truly remarkable street hypnotists out there, and it's amazing to me how many of my fellow hypnotherapists kind of enjoy that. They get out and it's an opportunity. Most of us like doing hypnosis. It makes us feel good. It's fun, and we get to spread what hypnosis is and how powerful it is. So it's kind of cool to see how many of the therapists go out and actually play with street hypnosis every once in a while. Never know, if you're here in the Seattle area, you might bump into me. It's something I've been known to play with from time to time. So have some fun with it. Both of these types of hypnosis that we've talked about have a tendency to use rapid or instant inductions, which means that the goal is to get you into hypnosis as quickly and as deeply as is possible. And so handshake inductions, and there's a whole variety of them, but the whole goal is you can't spend 20 minutes relaxing somebody into hypnosis. And interesting, these inductions, these rapid inductions, used to be frowned upon in therapy, but nowadays most of us consider them to be valid. When you get a client who that's an appropriate induction, you can sit them down in the chair, and 10 seconds later, they're already well off on their way into hypnoland. And so instant inductions, wider acceptance as a result of sort of the demonstrations here. And again, if you use them appropriately, these shows and this is cool stuff. It really is. Again, it depends upon the ethics and the skills of the hypnotist. So be skeptical, pay attention, watch. If they're doing something dangerous or stupid, walk away. Don't encourage them if they're doing that. So next one is hypnotherapy, and of course, virtually every other podcast in this podcast is about some variation of hypnotherapy. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there, other than to kind of gloss over it and say hypnotherapy is a chance to use hypnosis for change. And so that's kind of the working definition that I'm going to go with. I've mentioned before that there's kind of two sides to it. The vast majority is sort of the metaphysical side, or the woo-woo side, and then the other side is the clinical or medical side. It kind of depends upon what you're looking for and what you want to do. Inductions can be rapid these days, particularly more and more, but there's also progressive relaxation, where you sit and you relax every muscle a little at a time and focus. And even it's funny because the pocket watch and pendulum thing that everybody jokes about is a perfectly valid induction. It's eye fixation, and it works particularly well on kids and some adults. But if you can focus in on that pocket watch going back and forth, it's a perfectly valid induction, perfectly great way to put a client in, if that turns out to be the right way to do it. And people always ask me, what's the right induction to use with my client? And my advice is always to them, the one that works. And that's something that you have to trust yourself as a hypnotist, as a hypnotherapist. You have to spend some time reading people and perhaps using a little bit of leading language when you're chatting with them initially to get them to react a particular way, to give you the information you need to choose what induction works. But definitely you don't. There are some tests you can do. You don't have to. You don't need to. There's no wrong answer here. There's lots of right answers. It's just a question of dialing in on one that really works for you and works for the client. And of course, the secret about us hypnotherapists is that there's a certain level of confidence that's required. We really have to know what we're doing for it to work, because as a client, oftentimes you look to us for guidance. That's the navigator approach, where we navigate you and you're the driver, but you got to trust your navigator. You got to trust that they know how to get you there. And so instant inductions, therapy, lots of stuff that you can work on with that. Don't have to. I get people who come in and just want to experience hypnosis, or simply want to, quote unquote, be happier. And these are things that you can do right on up through trauma, PTSD. And on the metaphysical side, or the woo-woo side, of course, there's past lives, which some people, it's a valid therapeutic approach. My only dispute with it is that I don't believe it's really people experiencing a past life, but it is a perfectly valid projection. It's like a hypnotic Rorschach test where when you tell me that you were the Queen of England, I am curious about what that means to you now and how you're dealing with having been the Queen of England. So not against the practice of it, am against the practice when people act like it's a factual thing. Anyway. There's my soapbox. I always manage to work that in somehow just because, well, there's way too many people doing it. Next one is interesting, and this kind of pertains back to the article that started all of this. There's conversational or waking hypnosis. And oh boy. So there's such a fine line here, and the definition of hypnosis has to be flexible to really get there. And there are people who do these sort of shows where they demonstrate hypnosis without ever having an induction. And they demonstrate that people can be influenced and even manipulated. And that's what happened in this phone call, was a form of manipulation. And so I'm going to back away and say, I said it wasn't hypnosis. I'm going to argue that way over on the fuzzy edge are techniques that allow you to convince people. We've all done it. We all attempt to convince, to manipulate the environment around us and those around us to our benefit. Face it, it's life. It's how we work. You stand in line at the checkout stand as a kid and you try to get your parents to buy gum for you. We are attempting to manipulate the situation. You try to get your boss to give you a raise or not make you work Saturday. That's a manipulation of the environment around us. And if you're heavily trained, maybe you're a salesperson and you manipulate the environment around you by getting people to buy things. And so this is not hypnosis in the sort of sense where we define it, you eyes closed in a trance or on stage performing, can't count to the number 4, but there is an edge. And I'm willing to grant that if you define hypnosis in a very broad in a very broad way, in a very broad method, that way over on the edge of that, in the fringe, there's this conversational aspect. And there are some interesting demos on YouTube where people will go up and, using a very pre-scripted patter way of speaking, they will convince a hot dog vendor to take a blank piece of paper and then give them change by telling them that it's a $20 bill. It's possible with the right person in the right environment and with the right confidence and with the right practice. But what's interesting is that most of those hypnotists who have those sort of videos don't show how many times they failed at that. There are a few, and you can find those videos too, where they attempt to hand over the paper and the hot dog vendor balls up his fist and holds it out and says, what are you trying to pull? And so it's important to indicate here that while I'm willing to grant you that the techniques being used and the result start to resemble hypnosis a little bit, we're way off to the side of what hypnosis really is, and the success ratio drops dramatically. Again, we have the stage show folks who do sort of cherry pick the cream of the crop out of the audience, and then we have the hypnotherapists who have to have a huge toolbox because we don't get to not put somebody into hypnosis. And then if you're doing the street vendors, obviously the street people, it's embarrassing if you stand there and can't put somebody under. So you got to be really good at it. But keep in mind that if you're filming a TV special and you're going to do something totally dramatic, like tell a hot dog vendor that a blank piece of paper is money, at that point, and you're going to do it without any sort of induction. In other words, you have to do this without ever going sleep and having the person standing there with their head bowed. Nothing visible as hypnosis. If you're going to do that, my guess is you're probably going to shoot a whole lot of takes before you find somebody who's susceptible. You may even prep that person by doing them in advance, doing hypnosis with them, or asking them if they've had hypnosis before. In other words, they may be more susceptible to it. And then, so it's just, is it possible? Yes. Is it hypnosis? Maybe. Is it commonplace? No. But we do get people who fraudulently use techniques that you might recognize as the lead up to hypnosis. And so in the article, that's what was really happening there. And I think that for press, these two hypnotists that talked in that article called it hypnosis, but I think they do us a grave disservice when they do that, because they should have instead talked about manipulation of people. They should have talked about con games and how those work, and confidence games, and they should have talked about how there have always been people like that, and that it's not the same hypnosis as you might think of. It's similar techniques. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and leave that one there. So next one is environmental hypnosis. And this is another one that's right there on the fringe, where we talk about you're driving down the road and you're concentrating, and your mind begins to wander. Who's driving the car? Obviously, you miss your exit, but the car didn't veer off the road, so somebody was driving. And so there's this sort of environmental hypnosis that can go on. The sound of rain on the roof puts you into a semi-hypnotic state. And is it a hypnosis? Sure. It's an induction of sorts. Once again, right on that edge. Is it deep hypnosis? Probably not. But, there's variations to it. But it's something where you watch it. You sit and you watch the white lines go by, and suddenly you find yourself sinking into that state, or you don't even notice. And again, you drive past your exit. Subconscious takes over, and it's doing all the driving for you. And so we're going to call environmental hypnosis and go ahead and just leave it at that. It is, but it isn't. It's on the fringe. It lacks the deliberate aspect, the directional aspect of even stage or hypnotherapy. So it's a state that your mind slides into somewhere in between. And until we get somebody driving along and missing their exit with a brain monitoring system on, we're just not going to know if that's exactly the same thing. So final type of hypnosis, excuse me, final type of hypnosis. Let's talk about that sales hypnosis thing, because this is probably where most of us encounter that sort of edge of hypnosis. And it literally is a way of speaking. Some people have said that it's neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Really all that is a way of patterning words in a way to get people to react. Again, manipulation is not too strong of a word, shaping the world around you. And so when you deal with a salesperson and they seem to build rapport with you, you have an instant liking for them, that's probably deliberate. And when they seem to have the right answers, and when they know when to push and when not to push, and these are things that, is it hypnosis? Again, your definition has to be really broad. But is it a state that we find ourselves in where perhaps we're more adaptable, where we are more willing to suspend disbelief? And sure, anybody who's ever walked away from a salesman after purchasing something that they really didn't want, I'm willing to argue that that's a manipulation of the part of us that's affected by hypnosis. Again, we're not going to really find out. We need so much more research. We need people walking around with salad colanders with brain monitors on their heads so that we can start mapping this, because there's so much in that I recognize as precursors to hypnosis. It's sort of what hypnosis is going to become, or it's something that could be converted into hypnosis. But is it hypnosis? Man, I'm just not sold on going there. So sales and the environmental and the conversational or waking hypnosis, I'm going to put all those in this bucket of this sort of pseudo hypnosis, this thing that's partway there, but not quite. And again, great techniques, super valuable, can be applied to help change the minds of people, which is certainly part and parcel to hypnosis. So I'm willing to acknowledge that some people might say if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. And so, the hypnosis duck is certainly visible in there. Not willing to call it the same as hypnosis quite yet, but an interesting thing. It is a fascination of mine. I tend to watch for it. It's fun when I go shopping for something. I have even gone so far as to go car shopping simply to watch the salesman work, just to listen to them and to hear how they built the yes ladders. And so to, excuse me again, to listen to which ones plainly had sales technique and had been trained in either NLP or something similar, where they were able to monitor my behavior. In other words, to try to change the way that I was behaving. So, fascinating stuff. Probably something we will address in a future podcast, something that I really enjoy. And I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. If you think that these are all the same, or you think there is no such thing as hypnosis and none of these things are hypnosis, I'm willing to entertain that. I get it. My mind is open, and I consider myself sort of a perpetual student in this space. So would love to hear from you. Use the comments section, reach out. You can either do that from hypnotex.com, or you can go further down the page here, and you should find a comment block where you can fill it out and let me know what you think about this. As always, interested in your feedback, not just on this topic, but things you'd like to hear about, things you want to argue about. Starting to get to the point where we could do a pretty regular mailbag segment, and I think that might actually be kind of a fun thing for us to do. So I'm Rob from Hypnotex, and this has been the Hypnotex Podcast.